discussion.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, everyone. I'm facilitating today. So I'll start with my introductions and then we'll go around. And like Gina said, we can have everyone introduce themselves. So I'm Marie Fargo. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm the Instructional Resources Coordinator at Climate Generation. And Climate Generation is a small nonprofit based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I do a lot of like curriculum development as well as professional development with educators. So great to see you all today. Thanks for being here. I think for our introductions, I'd love for you again to kind of share what I just did. So name, pronouns, organization that you're part of. And I will put, we like to do what we call a stack. So just kind of an order that people can share and it'll just help us sort of keep things flowing. So I just wrote everyone's names as I saw you come in. Um, so is everyone able to see that in the chat? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. So you can just kind of unmute once the person in front of your name is finished sharing. And Gina, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Yeah, Gina Fiorelli-Duranlo. I'm the CLEAN Program Coordinator. And for those of you that are new to these calls, I um, help facilitate every week. And yeah, I see that I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. Kaka is on the call, and I have never met you before, so it would be great if you felt comfortable introducing yourself. Um, also, um, if you want to use the chat box, that's helpful too. Um, I'll pass it over to Carolyn and maybe we can try again in a minute. Oh, yeah, he's gone. Okay. I don't know what that was all about. Okay, I'll pass it over to Carolyn.
All right. So yeah, Carolyn Burns, she, her. I'm in the Tallahassee office for the CLEAR Institute. We do climate, clean energy, and environmental justice work in the state of Florida. My job is primarily curriculum development, teacher professional development, and community engagement. And
I'll jump in. Looks like we've lost Cassandra. Until she comes back, so I'm Sarah Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Western Colorado, work as an independent contractor with a gig called Wild Rose Education, and do lots of different climate education related things. Most excitingly, I guess we are in the, not I guess, most excitingly, Colorado, I'm working on a rural youth climate summit in rural Colorado. And also that's to support, one of the supports to support youth in receiving their seal of climate literacy, a graduation credential. So here we are, glad to be here, and pass it to Wendy, if Wendy's still here. Yep, Wendy's here.
Hi, I'm Wendy Johnson. I'm a science education specialist with the National Center for Science Education. I do kind of what everyone does, it sounds like, a little curriculum work, professional development, working with teachers. And I'm really interested in the standards conversation today. So since we lost our other person, I think it's over to Jim now.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Jim Callahan, he, him pronouns. I teach in schools in California, DC, and Maryland, multiple schools, basically supporting the regular teachers who are inside. And in addition, through museums, which in turn have whole school districts come up and visit us, and different schools. And then University of California hosts a number of events in California where hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of people come from all over the community, and we're always meeting new teachers and so on. So me too, me as well, very interested in the talk about how the standards fit in. So let's see, did Jason get a piece of, Yeah,
Yeah,
Jason
Melissa?
Cervenak. I'm at Ohio State at the Polar and Climate Center here, and I also work with our state climatologist. Usually I can't tune in, but I'm actually home because I decided it would be a good idea to get two vaccinations yesterday. Which after the nurse gave them to me, she told me I would be knocked out. They didn't tell me before I took both flu and COVID at the same time. So I am definitely not trying to go into the office today. So I was actually able to tune in for the first time in a while. And we do broader impacts on federal grants, but the state of Ohio has no climate change adaptation mitigation plan or education effort. So those calls often get routed to Ohio State, and we do the best we can with the resources we have and the grants we can get to deliver some level of programming, education, and data processing and analysis. Thanks. Glad to be here to see everybody, and it's been a long time.
Melissa, would you like to share next? And then Cassandra, I know you didn't get a chance to yet. And then Katie.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name is Melissa Rummel, and I work for the UCAR Center for Science Education. We're based out of Boulder, Colorado, and kind of the managing arm of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. I'm an education designer, so I make a lot of content for our website, classroom activities and curriculum and videos and things like that. And then also do teacher professional development and support teachers. And we also have a lot of direct funded projects. So sometimes we'll be designing something for like a museum or for an outreach group or for maybe someone's research project that has broader impacts as part of their funding and needs some kind of educational activities to share about their research. But yeah, so we do a lot of things, and we also have exhibits in Boulder at our flagship building, the Mesa Lab, and we host field trip groups and things like that as well, and do tours for the public and all of those kinds of things. And since most of our funding is from the National Science Foundation, we're able to offer all of this for free. Did you say Cassandra was going to go next?
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Melissa. Passing it on. My name is Cass Miller. I am with Action for the Climate Emergency. I'm the Education Program Coordinator, working mostly on our Climate Our Future program that provides educator resources that are aligned with NGSS standards, among others. And we also offer a newsletter for educators and our amazing Our Climate of the Future video series. I think I said I use she, her, hers pronouns, but I can't remember. And I'm based out of Tampa, Florida. And I think Katie's next.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see you all today. I'm Katie Boyd. I'm the CLEAN program manager, so based at CERES, the Center for Education Engagement and Evaluation. And I spend most of my time managing CLEAN, and then I also do some evaluation on other educational projects that we have as well. Nice to be here and see everyone.
Cool, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for sharing. So today is kind of an informal discussion, and as someone who works on curriculum a lot and thinks about that a lot, I always have questions about standards and how to integrate those into curriculum. So I just wanted to kind of throw out a couple of questions related to that. And if anyone else has topics you want to share, I just wanted to give everyone a second to add things if you want to our agenda. So feel free to unmute or throw things in the chat if you had other ideas for today. I'll just wait like a nice 20 seconds and see if anyone has anything else. Cool, thanks, Katie. Katie says, I like that discussion idea. Okay, cool. Yeah, Jason, you said, awesome, cool. Well, yeah, let's start there with standards, and then we can jump into other topics if we think of things too. I guess one of the questions I have is just, in your experience, either working with educators or as an educator, as a curriculum developer, to what extent do educators rely on those standards that you put in there, whether it's NGSS or a social studies standard or so on? I work particularly at the national level, so I'm thinking more like NGSS and C3 framework and the ones that kind of apply more broadly, but open to anyone's thoughts and experiences.
Well, one I could say
Oh.
is I'm gonna
Oh, go ahead.
I will tend to uh, the teachers that I will know and the schools I will know are teachers who actually are teaching climate change, want to teach climate change and leading and they're doing it. Where there are other schools where it's not or whatever going on. And um, one of the characteristics I think is that these are teachers who have a little bit of independence, they have a little bit of choice, but they really want to do this. They're looking for it. It's funny on how that looks. I think so. It's also especially in California and DC where communities are supportive or actually rather demanding that they should be taught. That sorry that a lot of times it's the standards I think are more in those areas are more they give permission to teach it, that there's a little bit less like why are you teaching that, or what's why aren't you teaching the standards? We are teaching the standards. um, Another characteristic is that for the schools that I know, part of why climate change is being taught is because it's available in their area in a way that's just really good. I mean, there are schools that contact us and want to do things where what they're really looking for is good science, hands-on science, interactive science, fun, engaging. The students love it. And we can help provide that with them. And that's what they first want. They first want really good, exciting, engaging science, not boring lectures all the time. Then that it is on climate change, all the better. And then when they learn how California and DC, if you understand the NGSS standards, you get starting in kindergarten and essentially every grade, there is fundamental material for climate change in every grade. In kindergarten, it starts with one of the biggest things that is brought out in the standards is students should learn how the sun warms the earth, right? How sunlight interacts with matter, and as they get older, that they find that out. That's just wide open for us. It generally is not understood that it's not taught that. Most schools just, I mean, another school that I'm at says, oh yeah, we tell students that. You're telling kindergartners that the sun warms the earth instead of getting outside and doing some experiments with it, get the albedo effect, get the different, when they get to see invisible light and things. So I guess where I'm going at is that what I see is it has so much to do with what the teachers want to teach and how good they want to teach it. And the difference is that generally those teachers aren't being supported, they're on their own. So that's just a whole nother subject that we're leaving those teachers to fight to deal with them themselves. And we deal at a high, most people in climate education deal at a higher level, and they don't actually interact with actual teachers. And that's one thing that I can see the difference of. Thanks.
Just to build off something that Jim said, I think that sometimes even, science educators who are really interested in climate education, even in my own organization, will sometimes say, oh, there's not much climate in the next generation science standards. And I'm like, you're wrong. Like all of the foundational things that lead to the misconceptions, that's the big thing that we focus on are, what misconceptions do people have that keep them from accepting climate change? Um, Obviously there's a lot of like political influence in that and cultural things, but a lot of it is like basic science. Jim brought up like the sun, and as a high school teacher, I would often just be so frustrated like that they didn't understand the difference between, like heat and light and like how much easier it would be to teach, the standards that I was responsible for if they had learned those foundational things at earlier grades. So I do think that we have to do a better job of, providing materials for those younger grades and showing them like why it's so important that students learn those foundational things. I know in my state work in Michigan, we've been talking a ton about elementary, and that elementary science kind of being the whole, and why by the time students get to high school, sometimes they're turned off to science. They don't really think it can be fun. And again, then the high school teachers do more and more of this, like, I have to teach this high level standard plus everything else, which often ends up being more telling and more like, well, the only way to get to all of that is to really not use best practices. So
I would jump in here, a couple different things. So I've been working on a project in Alaska in the Chugach School District, which is like where southeastern Alaska, but not like Juneau, like up by Valdez, the Chugach Mountains. And what I'm finding working in that place and in Alaska in particular is there's not only like we're doing a big STEM project and it's all about developing a deeper relationship with the ocean, but it's not just about science standards. There's actually cultural standards in Alaska, and I'm learning all about that because obviously I'm not from Alaska. And so it's curious to think about standards. Are we just talking about NGSS or statewide academic standards, science particularly, or are we thinking more broadly to more about culture and process of learning, process of thinking, like the process of doing science, I guess that's NGSS versus content, like not versus, but in addition to specifically like heavy duty memorizing content, etc. And as well as like social, like this work is not science, it's social studies, it's Common Core, it's so many things. And then we've got those layers upon layers of like the 2009 climate literacy framework and the energy literacy frameworks and the upcoming documents that are coming sometime very soon, we hope, like the new versions of what is good climate education. So I think all of it is to say that I think I use these standards to help me as a curriculum creator or program designer to make sure I'm within the bounds of like what is quality and what is expected, more so than maybe even the schools are asking for it or the teachers are asking for it. It's kind of a both and. It's train tracks are moving in both directions at the same time, but I think we as curriculum designers and so forth can really leverage those tools, but go beyond what is typical, and meaning go beyond science, because we know this work is about action and justice and everything else. Yeah. So. But then how do you document it? I think that was in the email that Marie had, or was put in the email that I guess Gina maybe sent. I don't know. I think the answer is it depends. Because I think the minute you start documenting things in curriculum, sometimes that's perceived as if the student does this activity, they're going to master that piece of they're going to be, they're going to, if there was levels of like accomplishment, they were going to master that content. And I hesitate to ever say that, environmental education, hit and run, drive by, one-off stuff ever is mastering anything. I think mastery comes through a lot of time that a student engages with information. And so I think if we start listing all these standards and curriculum resources, we have to be really careful not to claim that the student's not going to master these things in this 1 hour lesson, but maybe they get a taste or they get an introduction or something.
I was going to say, most of the educators that come to us, I would agree with Jim's assessment. They're usually, they have good content understanding. It's a priority for them. They're able to see the connection in the curriculum and the standards, because I do think NGSS and Ohio uses an adapted version of that. Doesn't make it explicit. So educators that are really in a hurry to understand the content knowledge as much, they might not know, or at least for a few years, how to put it in. I am excited by a lot of the engagement of other disciplines, and I've started to focus a lot more on media literacy and information literacy, because I see there's so many issues in science in the future too, but a lot of historical analogs that Naomi Oreskes has made us aware of, and trying to make that an integral piece. But just, it makes it that much more difficult in a harried lives that teachers have when they have so many obligations. If it was there explicitly, it would be just one step easier. And I know we were able to get paleoclimate in our standards so that when Ohio educators see stuff, it ends up linking to our web tools for creating a classroom ice core, and which drove a lot more traffic to our website than I ever expected. But I think it showed me that educators were looking for, how do I do this? Oh, here's a solution. Oh, this really works and it's applied. It involves a little bit of reading and interactivity, like Jim said, something that's a lab base, and it took off from there. Um, just because they have so many obligations now. And many of them have a supervisor that like wants to see a standard like what standard are you identifying now and documenting it in some kind of grade book or online portal.
I was going to add that I think my my perception of how teachers use standards has changed a lot. I've been like in the informal ed world for a while now, and I used to be a classroom teacher, and so like I have a different perspective of it now. Like to me now, I tend to feel like the standards are not my focus. When I'm developing something, I know I'm going to hit standards, and I usually have like an idea, or we have like, someone who wants us to design something that teaches XYZ, and then I find the standards that fit. But somewhere in my mind, we always talk about like we should just take a standard and then develop something that meets that one standard. So then maybe that would be helpful for teachers. They'd be like, you know what, I haven't touched on this standard yet this year, and oh look, there's a lesson. If I do this activity, my students I can say, yep, we covered that standard or something like that. But we never quite, it doesn't seem to ever, the creative process doesn't seem to lead us to that. And so I tend to be in this like kind of backwards place where it's like, oh, we have this great resource and now let's find the standards that match, because there always are standards that do match. However, I do know that there are, and it depends on your school and probably your district, there are still lots of teachers out there that are expected to put the standard that they're covering for the day on the board, to be sharing with teachers, like which standards they're addressing, during this unit. And like, it kind of depends on where the teachers are, right? What is their principal and their district requiring of them in terms of how much of the standards they are communicating and focusing their instruction on. So, I think it's definitely, NGSS has been great because it's, we can apply that, and it works for most people in most states where you are, even if their states have an adapted version, they can usually reference the NGSS. So we always make that forefront. Whereas before, some of the content that we've designed before I started working here had like Common Core standards and stuff. We've moved away from all that. But I will say also now, what I feel like we try to focus on, and I think Jason mentioned something about this too, is this idea of bringing in other standards from other disciplinaries too. So where are engineering standards? Where are literacy standards? Is there some social studies standards you can bring into, and just trying to make it clear, like in our idea to push that like science, a lot of schools aren't even spending that much time on science. So, if it's not science, like this is still a topic you could cover to practice literacy skills, to work on your social studies standards and things like that. And so this like cross-disciplinary idea is important to us. And so we try to highlight that in our activities whenever we can, to have like this option for teachers that are maybe interested in the topic and want to find a way to work some of those other curricular standards in. So I don't know if that's helpful, but something I was thinking about.
Thanks. Yeah, I heard that kind of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary thing come up a couple of times, and I agree that's something that Climate Generation is trying to do as well. I'm curious, yeah, if anyone wants to expand on that, and which other standards or frameworks are you using? What has been helpful for you as an educator or educators that you work with?
I mean, there is we usually look to the two Common Core that are cited. Not that all the states use those, but they usually use an adapted version. But for example, the argumentation section of the ELA standards, we reference a lot. That's critical for science, critical for history, critical for being an educated person, just looking at fact-based evidence to make decisions. So we often point back to that. I think that's brought us a lot bigger audience. It also, tends to bring in a lot of librarians because they have to support that usually across all disciplines. We're trying to work more in that space with media specialists in schools. Not really funded to do that, so it's kind of like I wouldn't say it's a strategic effort, but we do the best we can, and we've definitely found some receptive audiences there.
I just wanted to say, Jason, I think you brought up a good point. And this is something that I struggle with as well, and I think this is part of why I was interested in this conversation that Marie brought up in her prompt, is this idea of like national, CLEAN is national. So we try to sort of, like we tag and align things with NGSS, and that works pretty well on a national level because like you said, a lot of states, similar to the Common Core, like not every state uses NGSS. They don't all use Common Core. They have their own standards, but they tend to be aligned with or sort of adapted from NGSS, similar with, ELA and math with the Common Core. But I do know like teachers within those states, they really rely more heavily on their like state standards, but we can't necessarily like align everything with every state's standards. So I'm curious kind of like if anybody has thoughts around like, how teachers, I know with NGSS, it's still useful to have the NGSS because a lot of people's, like I said, states do align with those, but they're really trying to address their own state standards more than NGSS. So like, how do teachers, I know it's hard enough for them to kind of find standards, teach the standards, make sure they're addressing all the standards. What is your all experience working with teachers in that regard of like finding things that are aligned to these like national standards, but when they are trying to really teach to their own state's standards, if that makes sense? Is it still useful to have the like larger ones? Does that make, is that challenging to try to address both?
Well, and then Katie, in Colorado, every school district has its own version of its state standards.
Right, and exactly. I mean, it depends
So
which state
it's
you're in,
like,
because some states have more local control than others, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
states that are like that too,
I
where it's
think
like
we
each
just have to trust
district.
that teachers are awesome and teachers figure it out. That's been my experience, but I'll let somebody else speak.
I would say like the keywords are really important. And then again, helping teachers understand how they can kind of kill 2 or 5 birds with one stone. So I think this interdisciplinary thing is really important, especially at younger grades. Although even high school teachers, they get a lot of pressure. Science teachers get a lot of pressure for literacy in math. So whenever there's like a math connection, like that you can highlight and this sort of helps students understand, something about graphing or something about linear relationships or whatever. So I definitely like, and as a former teacher, I've always been really interested in the standards. So I'm like a little unique in that way. But even as somebody who really cared about the standards, I didn't necessarily go looking for something standards first. Like it was like, it's always like this backwards, how do I make this fit? Because I really want to do this if I'm out like looking for something. So I do think that's just really important that teachers are looking for things that are engaging, they're looking for things that hit all of these different buzzwords they're hearing. But then we do have to help them articulate how it gets at standards, because often when it comes down to like time and, like any kind of big decisions about course sequences and, even like for their evaluation, if they're going to have the principal come watch this lesson, they have to be able to very clearly say like, this is how it meets the standard. So I think the NGSS standards to me are the best place to start with that, because then they can kind of look at those words. But it's been interesting because even in states, having been in Michigan where there was like a long adoption process, and it seems like most teachers understand that we call them the Michigan Science Standards, but they're really NGSS. In other states, like they have no idea. I'm like just sort of like laughing, and I was like, your standards are NGSS. And they're like, no, they're not. And I'm like, yes, they are. Those little codes, those are the NGSS, and they don't even realize that they can go to these national sites, like Gina's saying, and that they could search that way. So I do think that's a bit of a problem, like a, kind of a communications, PR problem of like the states tried to kind of hide that they're using national standards.
I think in trying to address also with what Katie's bringing up is recognizing that there's such a variety of what teachers are about, what schools are about, what places there are, that hopefully our community will continue to have people who represent or focus on those different parts, right? That we're all not trying to do it all the same way. I think one is Wendy. The more I hear from you, the more it's like you're exactly the kind of teacher we need 10 million of teachers like you who are, looking for what should be taught, what they feel, and have some freedom to do that, and not just starting from I have to teach it this way, which is part of what I think is the difference. Is there are schools, there are districts, and so on where it's extremely regimented, and it's this boom, 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 boom. You have to check all these boxes. There are schools where, oh, well, as long as we're doing fine on English language arts and math, we're going to be fine. Then the district is going to be off our back. They don't really look at how we do on science anyway. So they're not really looking at that, right? There's all these different factors. What I would want to advocate is that there are those of us who really focus on the teachers who want to do it and are doing it, and give them support. I think if we don't, we're dead, because if we're always going for the lowest common denominator, or just going with those that just do what they're told all the time, how are we going to break out, and how are we going to show what climate education is capable of? Bringing it all together. So I think that's when I would say to the national standards is, I sometimes am bothered by the way our national approach is. It sounds so much like we're going for the lowest common denominator all the time. The big word is scale. We have to reach as many students as possible, many schools as possible. Okay, I think a lot of us need to do that. There needs to be do it, but what I see is a bigger problem all the time is the teachers who are breaking forward and doing it are left alone, and they burn out. The burnout rate is so high. I mean, when I get to meet someone who's teaching climate change right, they don't usually do it for more than 3 years because they're not getting supported. And when they do, it's because we can come in there and really support them and bring them along for 7 years. But it's so they're on their own, and there's no resources, or if they want resources, they have to go over to need in the oil companies and get money from them, because they will give you money, right? They will give you money if you go that route. So that's a factor. One I would also just say of the way in which standards and breaking it out is, it's so that maybe there's the thing of, if we do well in the NGSS standards, it opens up, and we need to bring in the English language arts, and the cultural and the social sciences one. They do that, but I think we need to do well on those. There is a lot of engineering standards, so there's a lot on application. That's another area where we can make it exciting. And finally, there's the one of the schools that really are getting into this that I see love the idea that we can do a way that the older students can teach to the younger students. The sixth graders can teach it to the K through 5. The high schoolers can teach to the middle school schools. The middle school students do that. People love that, and the kids love it. The older students love that. And in order to do that, they need to get on their communication skills. They have to do their social science. There's all these other things that happen. If we have education that allows them to be teachers, you can accomplish so much, I think.
Speaking of interdisciplinary, I put 2 links in the chat regarding teaching climate change in English language arts, which is my area of teacher education. And I think an important thing that's emerging in terms of meshing English language arts with science and social studies is having students go out and do hands-on interaction with natural nature context, having them study real lived world natural context, where they then focus both on the science of, say, a local drought or hurricane et cetera, as well as the language arts aspects of communicating about their experience, writing that up in natural nature journals and so on. So that meshing is a really important aspect of getting kids engaged as opposed to just sitting in the classroom and having lectured to. So I think hands-on interaction in natural worlds is emerging as a real key aspect of meshing both the ELA and science.
Carolyn, I saw your hand up. Would you like to go next?
Oh, we kind of moved on from the topic. It's not.
Oh, okay. Well, feel free to add it in the chat too. I'd love to hear what you think. I did want to highlight, Cass put in the chat a little bit ago about kind of digging into workforce development and career planning. I don't know if you'd like to share more about that first, or can I turn it over to you?
Thanks, Marie. I combined your name. I was going to call you Margot. Apologies. Yes, I am curious because our climate or future resources are geared to high school educators, and when I was spending time in high schools, I was finding that they were more interested. Our educators were more interested in workforce development. It was easier for them to teach climate in that capacity. So I was curious if anybody has any thoughts on the standards that are geared toward, college and career readiness, and how we might align that with some typical standards.
I would say that workforce development, or I might tend to use the words more career path or getting experience in what careers are, specifically climate action careers. Basically going with the idea that a huge amount of our economy is in climate action careers. If we choose to do that and the students do that, that's a big field for us. In the high school that we teach in DC, it's interesting because the teachers aren't used to doing that. I mean, even though they're very supportive and we're doing that, I'm finding that the idea of that we talk about careers in the classroom is kind of new to them, and it's our guests that are bringing it in to do that. But I'm going to just say that there's a thing of and that we bring it into the climate classes is the difference between when a student sees that this is something they might do for the rest of their life, that they have some place in it, and their interest in it is just phenomenally larger than, okay, you're going to learn a lot more science, another lecture, another class you have to take. That they get that kind of experience, and especially because I teach in a school where 92% of the students are Black, right? If they're paying any attention to society, people know things. The message is, if you're Black, you're not going to go into STEM. Very few people will get it. You're not going to be it. It's not for you. So this is not a practical field for you to deal with. If, on the other hand, and we have that, one of the nice things in DC, we have a lot of people who can come in and say, that's not true. We will support you. Look at us. Look at who we are. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, the person who teaches STEM, come into our classroom and we can go into, and you will be supported. And it's a totally different kind of a class. So, but again, it's new, and I'm kind of looking for other people to comment on it, of like actually teaching what climate action careers are like.
Well, even moving beyond that, thank you, James. Even moving beyond just like climate career, as we think about them, thinking about how we frame all of this amazing, we know that the IRA has brought a lot of industry and moving away from fossil fuels, and how we can support that transition in the realm of STEM, preparing young people for what their future might look like, without even having to blatantly discuss climate, though it is important. It's an important aspect of everything. But, teaching that tandem, hand in hand, climate change, this is the problem and this is the solution. And there are, jobs for a wide spectrum, whether you want to go into engineering or, city planning or, or solar installation or windmill mitigate, all of these different career paths. So, would that fall under social studies? Would that fall under, English? Like thinking about who is teaching this, because there has been an interest in the conversations I'm having. Mind you, I've been in, schools largely in Florida, though I talk to teachers throughout the nation. That's how a lot of them in high school, we're talking about high school, are motivated to discuss climate education. I saw Carolyn, you came off of mute, so.
Sorry, I'm lagging and glitching a lot. I don't know what's up with it today, but I've been I think that's, yeah, talking about like workforce development. I kind of talk about the fact that I'm a useless academic. I read and I write and I teach, and no one trusts me with power tools. No one should trust me with power tools. And that jobs like we want to upgrade our electrical infrastructure for and stuff, and that's going to need a lot of electricians. And that if you're making parts for solar panels and CNC machining, and a lot of these hands-on, like on the ground work is going to be done by folks in vocations and trades. And I haven't really had much success. Like a lot of the kids I'm talking to are nodding their heads, and then they're going to go on to four-year programs. So trying to actually get into sort of those vocational and technical schools and areas where you can bring this up to the students, I haven't had as much success with. I think we still need to work on that messaging, or maybe y'all are having more success than I am, and it is just me. It's okay to tell me that, but that is an ongoing effort, and I do think that's important.
Agreed, Katie, or Carolyn, sorry, now I was looking at Katie's message. Agreed, Carolyn. That's where I was kind of curious about those standards that we might be like wanting to gear that information toward. If any educators on this call have any thoughts about what that looks like, because I know in my area, technical training is really large, but like, how do you get your foot in the door? Like, who are you advertising to essentially?
I would just add to this that I was talking with some high school, I guess they just started their senior year, these girls in rural Colorado. And so we were hanging out in June or something this summer, and I had them reading some of the documentation we were writing up on like the why of doing a youth climate summit. And I wanted teenagers' perspective on our all this banter that we write and then we use to write grants and all that. And they were put off by this idea of workforce development. They're like, no, this is about creating a planet where we can all survive. And I was like, yeah, I agree with you. This is not about capitalism. And they went off on this whole point about capitalism and so forth. And I was like, wow. And so it was eye-opening. And I think that no matter wherever this kind of conversation goes or the work goes, I think actually working with the young people and their perspectives is like critical. And I didn't expect that kind of, response. It was eye-opening for me. And yeah, like having them be part of whatever conversation, because 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds are pretty opinionated and pretty smart, I would also say. And yeah, so like we're talking about marketing, or like who is the audience? Because like these girls, they're all going off to like, 4-year institutions. They're not interested in vocational training whatsoever. And that's just a very small sample size, of course.
Yeah, that's true. That's really great feedback. I think there's a pathway for everybody, and it's all going to look different. And it's really like when it comes to educator resources, I was wondering like how to get the educators who are interested in that, who that is their target, because I was on the path of technical training, right? I ended up going to nursing school, and which isn't technically technical training, but that is where I grew up, in rural areas where it wasn't the expectation that everybody went to a 4-year school. A lot of people did go to trade school, which is less common now. Not less common, but it's just not necessarily the pathway. So I really appreciate everybody's feedback.
And I'm also curious about like how we influence school counselors and the people who trusted messengers for these high school kids, right? How do we, and that's not, lots of people are thinking about that, but it's like, how do you influence those folks? And I think it's parents and grandparents and community members as well, because they're getting messages from all over the place about what they should do next. So it's a big, 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 important conversation and actionable work to be done.
I think in terms of getting kids and particularly high schools involved, I've done research on what I call environmental clubs. And what I found in that research is that the clubs allow the members to have a lot of autonomy because the teacher coordinators sort of back off and say, okay, you decide on what you want to do. And so what I found was through their participation in these clubs, these high school students really gained a lot of agency. And so they took that agency and they went out of the school and then got involved with politics, lobbying the legislatures about, electric buses or pollution aspects. So these clubs allow students outside the classroom to really get engaged and acquire a lot of agency. And that's based on my research on these clubs in a suburban Minneapolis high school.
Richard, agreed. I mean, when looking at what schools are the kind of schools where we want to support, where they're likely to do something or they're doing something well, having an environmental club, green clubs, different terms, is one of the best, most reliable indicators. In fact, if they don't, it's kind of like, ooh, that's something huge to work on. I mean, that ability to be independent and do things. And Sarah, that's kind of great when you get that kind of positive feedback. Is the way of, because I think, for instance, with respect to Cassandra, I'm bringing up the subject of workforce development. I don't use that with the students because it's sort of like it's allowing it to come in from their point of view. So I'm not saying don't use that term. I'm just saying with the students, how about there is the one of they need to look at where can I go, especially kids who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. How can I turn this into something I can do for a living, right? But I think for many of the students, Sarah, the ones you're saying is there's an opportunity to do something about climate change for the rest of your working life, right? You can do something that you care about that's meaningful to you and you can make decent money at it. Do you want to hear about that? Do you want to look at those? And there are so many of them. We're not telling you have to become an electrician, or we're not telling you have to become a lawyer. You have to tell you this, but there's all these, which ones would you like to explore? And we'll bring people in. For the building trades, there is of course reaching out to the local apprenticeship programs that where people go after high school, where they actually can become an HVAC person or an electrician in those kind of fields. That's kind of hit and miss because some of those programs are not very good at coming to schools, and they're kind of narrow, and they're really about hiring somebody's nephew rather, right? That still goes on, right? That kind of thing. But there are some that are quite good, and that would want to be reached out to. But I mean, I think Frank Neopold has brought this up. One of our greatest assets is, even though there are states and areas where people don't want to hear anything about wind and solar and everything's about coal and everything, yeah, that's true. But the fact is, a huge amount of our economy and where it's going is in this field. For the students to know that and for some of them to choose that's gigantic. I mean, there's a lot of subjects in school, but not a lot of them that you can make really decent money doing something you really care about.
Thanks, James. And Cass, I see your hand is up, but just before that, I wanted to jump in and remind everyone we're going to wrap up just about 5 minutes early today to give people a break between potential other meetings. So we just have a couple minutes left. So thinking about everything we've talked about today, we've had kind of meandering conversations between standards and workforce kind of development, skills building. If you have any final thoughts or like advice or things you want to share with folks, if you could just use the raise hand feature, that way we'll be able to go in order and hopefully give everyone a few, 30 seconds or so to kind of share their final thoughts. And we can start with you, Cass.
This opportunity for final thought. The reason I ask is as we've had these discussions in the past, in many states, teaching climate can be very contentious for educators. So we're trying to empower educators to teach climate while, you know, our overarching goal of moving away from fossil fuels is seen. So unfortunately, in some areas, teachers can't just teach climate. So if anybody wants to, if anybody knows any standards that we can, you know, move forward with as I explore this pathway, please feel free to email me.
Jason, did you want to share?
I was trying to figure out where the hand raise button went. I guess there's an upgrade to Zoom and I've somehow lost that feature. I was just trying to reiterate, we've been speaking to a lot of schools and educators now, and I think one of the big takeaways I have is the Six Americas and the NPR polls, like actually giving permission to say this is where the populace is. And I always like to start out by asking them to write the percentages themselves for the two right-hand bins together and two left-hand bins. And young people actually get them spot on. I've started doing this in undergrad classes, and they're pretty good at the percentages. The older population is always off by half, and there's been a study of that. And it's starting there and just saying, okay, you're operating as if you think only a third of the US population is in the bins of wanting to take immediate action, decisive action. That's 2/3 or more. And so you need to, shift your frame of mind around this so you prioritize things differently, because right now you're still pandering to this really small percentage. And once they see that, I feel like the conversation in the room changes, and we're going to get some time to do this with informal educators around the state. But it's almost like there's a weight lifted off people's shoulders as they realize they have a lot more space to operate in, and then conveying that to their leadership and their organization.
That's great. That's a great idea. I love that approach. That's really cool. Well, we do have 5 more minutes if people want to stay on and continue chatting, but I also want to give people space. I don't know, Gina, did you have any wrap up or final thoughts?
I think this is a good discussion. So thanks everyone for being here. And yeah, just I think it's important to start giving some time between meetings. So that's it.
Yeah, appreciate hearing from you all. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.